Well, hello. You can see I've got some stuff here in the background. I don't, maybe that's too, I don't know. Where do I have a, there, that's a little bit better. Should be easier to um, focus now. Okay, so in class today, I'd like to just do this ed puzzle because it's very difficult for me, obviously, for any teacher to get a lot of one-on-one time with students, and so it's impossible to really get one-on-one time with you specifically. I'm going to try to make this um, as one-on-one as I can possibly make it because I want you to feel like I care for you, like, you know, as an individual too. So I want to ask us a couple questions and just get your feedback here. I guess the first question is, how are you doing? How is your life going? Um, I know that there's been a pandemic. I know that, you know, right? I mean, have you figured out life in this pandemic? School, work, personal life, all that kind of stuff. And I understand that if the pandemic was the only thing that you had to worry about, I'm sure that would mean that there's a lot of that. If the pandemic was all you had to worry about, you probably have had a very nice life, right? So I understand there might be some personal issues in everybody's life. Um, how are you doing with those? Like, you doing well? Um, are you good? Let me know. You don't have to go into, you don't have to tell me private stuff, right? But I just want to know how you're doing, so you can feel free to tell me as little or as much as you want there. Number two, um, what can I do for you? Is there anything that I, as a teacher, can do for you right now? If it's in my power, I would like, and if there's something that you need, I'd like to try to help. So, um, let me know, especially with school. But if you have other things that's going on that you want to help or advice on, let me know, and I'll see what I can do there. I can't promise everything, but there. Number three, how do you feel about the end of course exams? Not just mine, but all of them. Some of you might be taking three or maybe even four, right? In the next couple weeks. How do you feel? Do you feel ready for them? Um, I feel like it's a scramble right now to try to get everything that I want to talk about in, that I need to talk about so that you know how to do this, how to pass this test. How do you feel? Are you scrambling? Are you good? Are you not worried about it? Are you in a place where you feel like you're going to try your hardest? Are you in a place where you're like, I don't really care. I'm not going to give much effort. Somewhere in the middle. Um, what's going on? You know, there with you, and specifically this class too. How do you feel about this class? Do you feel like if you took the end of course exam tomorrow for U.S. history, would you be relatively ready? Having understanding that we haven't reviewed any, um, which I totally plan on doing that. What do you think? Four, is there anything I can do that I'm not doing that will help you learn better? If you can think of anything at all, please put that down, if you would, please. Okay, so let's do a little review. Me and you. I'm going to call this five, but whatever. I want you to think back to the beginning of the year, if you possibly can at all. and I'm going to insert a series of trivia questions here, and just do the best you can with those. Think back to the founding documents. The founding documents. Mr. Beavers, what are founding documents? Okay. Well, you'll see in just a second, right? Um, that was back when Batman was helping us out a lot. Um, he's over there. You can see him laying down. I feel neglected, Mr. Beavers. You haven't used me in a long time. What's your deal? Sorry, Batman. I have not been wearing your gator mask much lately, Mr. Batman. Sorry. Okay, questions. Six. Some Cold War review questions. Yay. What you learned yesterday, did it sink in well enough? Do you understand the tension between the Soviet Union and the US after the war? Two allies during the war, now enemies after World War II is over. Do you understand why they're right? Well, I'm just going to put some questions in. Now, let me shrink myself down here. Wish I could shrink my belly fat. Mr. Beavers, you can if you just work out and eat less. Batman, you're right. Okay. So, I've talked about this a little bit with you, the Iron Curtain speech. These countries are not governed directly by the Soviet Union. They are not part of the Soviet Union. They might be puppet governments. Moscow, the capital of Russia, might be pulling the strings. They might help prop up governments here, but these are quote unquote independent countries. They are satellite nations. They're a buffer zone. Stalin's vision is we've been attacked. World War I, World War II. If these stay here and they're friendly to us and there is an invasion coming this way, well, if there's an invasion coming this way, then we got all this buffer zone to keep them out of the Soviet Union. Those are his satellite nations. They're not part of the Soviet Union themselves. On this other side of the Iron Curtain, democracy. That says democracy. I know it doesn't look like it. These are the democracies of Europe, the Western countries of Europe. Franco is still down here. I think he gets kicked out. When did Francisco Franco get removed from power? Hold Spain as a military dictator. Oh, gosh, till 1975, right? They're still a fascist in Europe, apparently. Good grief. They're out of the picture there. I don't know why they didn't just kick him out. But anyway, I don't know that history. You should ask Miss Collins. She might know more Spanish history than I do. So I'm sure she does. The battle lines are drawn, basically. Now, just so you know, Truman's approval rating was up and down, up and down, and up and down, right? After the A-bombs, he's really high up there. And then The economy kind of goes down a little bit, and so he goes down there. Marshall Plan and Berlin airlift. Hey, why does it go down here? I think it had to do with the economy again, and then he gets reelected somehow. And then slowly over time, approval ratings go down again. That's Truman. He's up and down, up and down. Historians look back and say he's better than people thought he was. But you can see he left with an approval rating of around 30 something percent. Right? And a lot of this has to do with the Korean War right here, which we'll look at a little bit in a minute. And remember that containment is the main goal of Soviet Union. No. World domination is the main goal of the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin is a Marxist. Karl Marx predicted in his Communist Manifesto a worldwide communist revolution. The Soviets want to spread communist influence around the world. This is true. This is not something that's debated. Containment was, let's use the rest of the world to keep the Soviets in their sphere. This right here, let's not get them, let them get anywhere outside this. Keep them inside their box. Don't let them take Austria. Don't let them take Italy. Don't let them take Greece or Turkey. Keep everybody from going communist. That's containment, containing. The Truman Doctrine. We take this for granted now because, did you look at the last stimulus bill? All this hundreds of millions of dollars going to other countries to help other countries out. This is not something that we did in 1947. And Harry Truman said, let's start sending money to places around the world so that they don't go communist. No, go back. Let's send money to Greece and Turkey so they don't go communist. Marshall Plan, let's send $12 billion. This was an amazing amount of money to Western Europe so that they don't go communist. Italy was close to going communist. France might have gone communist. Let's rebuild them. Let's make sure they don't go communist. Let's rebuild. Lots of money given. Notice, there's not any money given to the communist countries, right? The money was given to the non-communist countries. Then we get NATO. Mutual Defense Alliance. This means one of the mottos of NATO was an attack on one is an attack on all. If Stalin decides to attack West Germany, then everybody is going to attack Stalin. Everybody that's a member. And other members include the US and Canada over here, which is part of the North Atlantic Ocean, which is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, China fell to the communists. Mao Zedong won. Truman's administration said, yeah, we might as well just give up China because it's not worth fighting a third world war to keep China from going communist. There's Mao. He only killed 50 million people in his rise to power. The Soviets get the A-bomb in 1949. This is another reason why Truman's popularity goes, psh, right? Psh. Okay. And of course, you should remember the Berlin airlift. When Stalin decided to blockade West Berlin, we could either do nothing and let them take West Berlin. We could drop bombs on Russia. Nuclear bombs, why not? This was, a little bit before we knew that they had nuclear weapons. Truman chose to go middle of the road. we will drop tons of food, like literally, like millions of tons of food into West Berlin so that they will be safe. And this little island of democracy inside of East Germany was kept and was kept from starving. And Stalin eventually backed down. Cheers every time an American or British plane came to deliver food for these West Berliners because they were blockaded by Stalin. Now, that's all review. Something new. Truman leads the United States in a war. 5 years after World War I or World War II ends, the United States is involved in another war. Congress does not officially declare war. They do not officially declare war. So technically, you could call this the Korean police action. But North Korea and South Korea had been divided. The Soviets had conquered North Korea from the Japanese. The Americans had taken the southern part of Korea from the Japanese. And the goal was eventually to have them reunify into one. The problem is that the South was democratic and did not want to go communist, and the North was communist and did not want to go democratic. And so North Korea just decided to invade South Korea, and they tried to make it all communist, right? Now, look at how this happens. Look at what happens here. The North and the South is divided at the 38th parallel. I think this was decided at the Potsdam Conference, I think. Truman and Stalin. I'm pretty sure. It might have been Yalta, but I think it was Potsdam. The North invades. The war starts in 1950. The United States is not involved yet. It gets worse. The North Koreans almost take the entire peninsula. They almost take all of South Korea. You can see here the Pusan defensive zone was the only part that was kept safe from the communists from North Korea. Right, this is the only major city, Pusan, that the Southerners, the democracy of South Korea, had left. And so at this point, Truman decides technically to have the UN, the United Nations, lead a coalition of troops to go take back South Korea. But let's be honest, it was mostly the United States. And an American general leads. Douglas MacArthur. He leads the troops, the UN troops, the American troops. They have an amphibious landing at Incheon. So MacArthur's troops landed right in here-ish. Amphibious meaning from water to land. And then they, together with the South Koreans, they start pushing back. And you can see here, they almost totally wiped out the North Korean army. Here's the problem. Douglas MacArthur is a stubborn guy, and he wants to win at all costs. That's his belief. If you fight a war, you should win the war, right? You don't take a stalemate. You just don't do that. He's almost got all of North Korea. You can see here, this is all that's left of the North Korean, the communist army there. But the problem is he gets too close to the Yalu River. The Yalu River is the border between North Korea and China. Saying it like Donald Trump. The Chinese had warned us, don't get too close. We got too close. The Chinese got involved, and the Chinese joined the communist Chinese, joined the communist North Koreans. And they pushed back, and you get basically here. Almost back to the original, right? The original line. So basically, however many tens of thousands of Americans died in this war, it ended up being almost hardly any ground changing hands in the long run between here and here. By the time the armistice is signed in 1953, Douglas MacArthur has been replaced. MacArthur kept saying to Truman and to the press, let's just nuke China, blast them back to the Stone Age, right? And Truman says, no, we're not going to do that. And so MacArthur kept going to the press and bad mouthing Truman, his commander in chief, his boss. And Truman said, you got to stop that. And MacArthur didn't stop. He kept bad mouthing Truman to Congress and to the press. And so Truman fired MacArthur. He just fired him. He's done. It's a life lesson right there, right? Like, no matter how bad your boss is, if you take to social media and complain about your boss is going to find out and your boss is going to fire you, right? Or they're going to make your life miserable. So don't badmouth your boss on social media. Just don't do it. Learn the lesson Douglas MacArthur lost. Now, when MacArthur was fired, he goes to Congress. Congress allows him to make a speech. He makes this speech called Old Soldiers Never Die, right? And so on and so forth. But he's relieved of command. Matthew Ridgway takes over instead. And basically, the rest of the war is a limited war. It's basically like trying to keep the status quo. And Truman leaves office in early 1953. Dwight Eisenhower runs for president, a World War II general, the mastermind behind D-Day. Dwight Eisenhower runs for president. On one of the things he says he's going to do is get us out of Korea, and he does. He gets an armistice signed, a ceasefire signed, July of 1953, and the war is over. So, in a sense, containment works here. We keep communism from spreading outside of South Korea, but it costs a lot of lives in a faraway place that some Americans don't even think has much to do with them. And it's a sad thing, but if you have grandparents that there's Douglas MacArthur making his farewell address, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. If you have grandparents that served in Korea, first of all, thank them for their service. And then realize that when they came home, there wasn't these ticker tape parades like there was in World War II. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War because people just kind of went on with their lives and didn't really bother with it. There wasn't rationing, right? Victory gardens and all that as much as there was in World War II. There just wasn't. And you can see the Korean War really made Truman's approval rating fizzle out at the end there. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do now is have you watch a little bit more of this video. I'd like for you to, if you don't have number 11 yet.
In France, there was a definite momentum, it seemed to me, in favor of the Red Menace.
The political leadership in the United States, for its part, saw the wisdom in getting Europe back on its feet in an act of unprecedented generosity.
Okay, for number 11, if you don't have number 11 yet, I think maybe only one class has number 11. If you don't have number 11, here's what I want you to write down for number 11 on your video sheet. What was the difference between the way America dealt with post-war Europe and the way the Soviet Union dealt with post-war Europe? U.S. gave aid to Western Europe. The USSR took stuff from Eastern Europe. Industrial machines, resources, The Soviets wanted to get back what they lost. The United States wanted to encourage Western Europe as a counter to the Soviet Union and encourage trade. Major difference there between them. Okay.
America sent $13 billion in aid.
The United States is the only country in the world today which has the economic power and productivity to furnish the needed assistance.
The Marshall Plan, named after the Secretary of State, seemed the perfect merger of American ideals and good politics.
America was a strong, generous country. It is fashionable to make fun of it, but it really was true, and we were rich, and we were confident, and we were sympathetic to the devastation of Europe and what we could do. The Russians were very, very harsh. Where we were sending in stuff to Western Europe, they were stripping down Eastern Europe and mailing and railroading everything back east.
As the Soviets tightened their hold on the captive nations of Eastern Europe, those who could escape did. Alice Sylvester and her family had survived the Nazi death camps and made their way home to Czechoslovakia.
There was a Russian doctor, and he said, "My child, I love my country, but the Russians are going to overtake here. So my advice to you is go, run." So my mother and I, during the night, went to the railway station and got on a train, and we got out. And the next morning, they closed the borders. So the people that stayed couldn't get out.
Churchill had been right. Those people now trapped behind the Iron Curtain would be subject to Soviet exploitation and repression for the next 4 decades. Berlin had lived through a nightmare, and at the end of World War II, the landscape reflected it. The fighting here had been particularly vicious. On the Eastern Front, the Germans had fought to the bitter end. The Soviet army had suffered 500,000 casualties before the German capital fell.
The Russian soldiers, they were intoxicated by blood, by cruelty, and it was with the memories of what Germans did to their mothers and sisters and daughters. They wanted to do the same. There was huge loot, burning down of houses, rape.
Soviet troops raped thousands of women.
My mother was raped, gang raped.
Ugh.
So we landed.
Sorry, I can't show that part because it just talks about basically, look, the Soviets did terrible, terrible things to the Germans.
The Russians behaved themselves miserably here. Several months later, the Western Allies arrived. One of the first U.S. missions into post-war Berlin was flown by Jack Olin Bennett.
So we landed. And then the Russians started lobbing shells over my head, shooting the windows out of the airport with artillery shells. Why the hell are the Russians shooting the windows out of this magnificent airport? Then I thought, this is going to be the American sector, and they don't want to leave the Americans anything.
Located deep inside what was now Soviet-controlled East Germany, Berlin would be divided into Soviet, American, British, and French sectors. Stalin resented this democratic outpost in Eastern Europe. This was intended as his buffer zone against any future attack from the West.
Stalin presented his image of the countries on the other side of the Iron Curtain. These countries want to subjugate Russia with its immense mineral wealth. They are natural enemies of the socialist and communist state.
The first face-to-face confrontation of the Cold War was in Berlin. Stalin was determined that the Western Allies should leave, and in June of 1948, he cut all the supply lines into the Allied sectors.
It was very tense. And we knew that, and it got tenser and tenser.
West Berliners had enough food to last a few weeks, enough fuel to last only days.
Truman said in meetings in the Oval Office, and he meant it, we stay in Berlin.
You live with the expectation, I did, that we would be going to war with Russia.
The United States were painted and depicted by official propaganda as the greatest enemy, ready at any hour to drop atomic bomb on Russia.
We were close to a Third World War. There were some who were arguing we should leave. It isn't worth it. Get out. Why start a Third World War over this city? Others were saying we should send an armored division through and break through by force.
Now that's David McCulloch. He's a very famous historian. He wrote a book about Truman called Truman. Imagine that. And it looks something like this. And David McCulloch's done a lot of, he's been a narrator in a lot of documentaries and movies and stuff as well. So I want to make sure that you got 12. 12. Stalin was so worried about Eastern Europe that he wanted a buffer zone, right? So what did Truman do in 13, question number 13 on your sheet, to avoid a Third World War? A Third World War that would only be 3 years later after the First World War. Truman conducted, along with Britain, the Berlin airlift. Second part of 13. Was there any irony in his tactic in regards to Germany? He was helping our former enemy, our enemy in World War I and World War II. He was now helping them. He was helping the Western Berliners, who had, maybe some of them had just fought against us, but he was helping them because now the big enemy is the Soviet Union.
President Truman chose another option. He would supply the beleaguered city by air. It was a gamble. American and British pilots who had once dropped bombs on this city would deliver supplies to Berlin hour after hour, day after day.
We were so busy during the airlift. I was flying 128 hours a month. It's a lot of fun. And we were keeping people alive.
They flew in food and fuel and medicine. They were the lifeline for 2.5 million Berliners. After 11 months, Stalin conceded. Without saying a word, he ended the blockade in May of 1949. 3 months later, Stalin would shock the West again.
Now there are
The
two
Soviets had the atomic bomb.
superpowers.
In 1949, it then became, once again, a different world.
Okay, thanks. Have a good one.